Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader, and welcome to the Black Belt Leadership Podcast, where each week I'm giving you tips, tools, insights, and resources to help you become a better version of who you are and what you do as you discover, develop, and deploy your own Black Belt leader within. Hey, this week I want to go back into the golden age of comic books and I want to revisit the character Green Lantern. And I want to look at some life lessons, really some leadership lessons from the Green Lantern character. And I want to pose the question, what color is your ring? So let me start with a little backstory on the character of Green Lantern to set up the conversation that we want to have today. Now, in 1940, the very first Green Lantern character appeared in the golden age of comics. The character's name, Alan Scott. Now, Alan Scott, in the comic series, he was fighting both common criminals and supervillains in Capital City with the aid of a magic ring. How he got the magic ring? Scott was a railroad engineer, and after a train crash, he came into possession of a magic lantern. So Alan Scott crafted a magic ring so that he could harness the powers of this magic lantern and he could utilize that to battle the forces of evil in Capital City. Well, the character really led off to great success, and then during World War II, we saw the character fade and eventually disappear from the comic book series. Now, in 1959, writers John Broome and Gil Kane, they re-envisioned bringing this Green Lantern character back, but with more of a science fiction focused. They envisioned the Green Lantern as a member of an international, intergalactic, very prestigious Green Lantern Corps. And all of a sudden, a character by the name of Hal Jordan became the face of the franchise. Now, according to the DC story, Hal Jordan received the ring, his ring of power, from a dying alien who commissioned Hal Jordan to take his place as a member of the Green Lantern Corps. Now, the Green Lantern Corps, if you're not familiar with it, it was an interstellar peacekeeping organization, and it was overseen by the Guardians of the Universe. Now, according to DC comic lore, the Green Lantern Corps had been keepers of the peace in the known universe for over 3 billion years. Now, the Corps had a standing army of 7,200 members, and they were headquartered on the planet Oa, which was the home of the Guardians of the Universe. Together, these 7,200 members patrolled 3,600 sectors of known space throughout the universe. Now, the Green Lantern Corps was combined of species from the known universe, and the Green Lantern Corps was charged with fighting evil with the aid of a ring that gave them extraordinary power. Now, all the lanterns, regardless of their origins, were united in a common goal of peace and order. Now, the Guardians were immortals, and each one of those Guardians presented the lantern with a ring of power. All 7,200 members of the Lantern Corps possessed a ring. Now, this ring was powered by the willpower, the belief of the wearer. And utilizing that ring, they could mold solid energy into whatever shape that the lantern desired. Now, this ring was not only used to harness solid energy, it could also provide a protective shield that would allow the lantern to fly and survive in the depths and the cold of outer space. Now, the lantern's ring of power, again, according to the DC universe, is often referred to as the most powerful weapon in all of the DC arsenal of weapons that exist in this world known as the DC universe. But interestingly enough, the power of the ring was limited only by the user's will. The ring harnessed the user's willpower, their belief in themselves, and they were able to manifest thought. Whatever they thought, whatever they dreamed of or they imagined, if they believed it to be true, they could manifest thought into its physical representation in space and in time. Utilizing the ring of power, the Green Lantern Corps individually could literally turn belief into reality. So it takes the concept, as you think, you say, you do, and you become, as we talk about here on the podcast often, it takes that concept to an entirely different level. Now, before Hal Jordan became the greatest of the Lantern Corps, he had to learn to harness the power of will, his will, to channel the energy of the ring. Now, interestingly enough, if he could not believe it to be true, the ring could not conceive and bring solid energy into that construct that he was trying to imagine in his thoughts. For Hal Jordan to be able to wield the power of the ring, it demanded an intentional act of his will, an unwavering belief in himself and in that construct that he envisioned in order to manifest that ring's power to fight against the evils of the known galaxy. So the Lantern's imagination and their mental discipline governed the ring's effectiveness as a weapon. Now, the ring could give off an energy beam very similar to a laser that we think about today, but that energy beam could be transformed into various energy constructs to serve the needs of the lantern. And again, it also empowered the lantern with supernatural strength, as well as the ability to fly both in inner space and in outer space. So for Hal Jordan and the rest of the Lantern Corps, the power of the ring was limitless, subject to the willpower, the belief of the user. Now, if we go to the dictionary and we look up the word willpower, we see this definition. Willpower is control exerted to do something or to restrain impulses. It's also defined as the ability to resist a short-term temptation in order to achieve a long-term goal. I think more specifically, we could refer to willpower as determination, belief, or self-control. It's the ability of an individual to control their emotions and their desires, especially in difficult situations. So to sum it all up, willpower is firmness of purpose and it's being resolute in action. Now, interestingly enough, other lanterns beside the Green Lantern Corps exist in the DC universe, and each one of these lanterns yields their own unique ring of power. But that ring of power is uniquely linked to its emotional source, the character traits of the wearer. Let me give you some examples. The Blue Lantern Corps. The Blue Lanterns were selected for their immense hope. They used their rings to bring hope to the hopeless. They often worked alongside Green Lanterns to boost their willpower. Now think about that. The power of belief supported by the power of hope. That is a powerful weapon. Now, Indigo Lanterns are powered by compassion. And they didn't have a ring, they had a staff. And they used their energy staff to spread empathy and understanding to all they came in contact with. So Violet Lanterns, different from Indigo, they were empowered by love. And they used their ring of power to find and to protect true love wherever it may exist. But not only did we see positive emotions and positive character traits amplified by the rings, we also saw negative character traits and negative emotions amplified by rings at all. In fact, the Red Lanterns were chosen from among the angriest beings in the known universe. Those rings were powered by rage. And as a result of that, those rings often led to destruction and chaos. Now, the Yellow Lanterns would wield rings that generated fear, and it would allow the user to create constructs based upon their enemy's very worst nightmares. Orange Lanterns, on the other hand, they were powered by greed, and they were able to channel the emotion of avarice. Now, White Lanterns were capable of combining all the powers of the 7 other colors, and Black Lanterns, completely devoid of emotion or life, their rings brought death and destruction. Now, out of all the rings that existed in the DC universe, the Green Lantern is considered the most powerful of the rings of power. Now, why is that the case? Well, if you think about light, and you see light as a spectrum really played out in the story of the Green Lantern, but if you shine light through a prism, you see green in the center of the spectrum. Green is the balancing point of the spectrum when light passes through a prism. So as colors drift closer to the outlying edge of the light spectrum, the lantern's ability to both use and control their emotional power and the character traits that powered that ring, the ability to control and use that effectively became more and more difficult. You got to remember, willpower, defined by determination, defined by self-control, and governed by an unwavering belief in themselves and their abilities, it made the Green Lantern Corps the most powerful peacekeeping force in all the universe. So at this point, you may be saying, okay, John, that's great. I love the backstory. I've seen the movie. Green Lantern was pretty cool, but what's the lesson of Green Lantern? Well, I'm glad you asked because that's where I want to go in the conversation for just a few moments. What are the lessons that you and I can learn and apply to our lives from studying the story of Green Lantern? The first lesson is this. You and I, we all wear a ring of power every single day of our lives. And that ring defines how we're seen and how we are perceived by the world around us. The emotions that we allow to govern our lives, the character traits that dictate who we are and what we do are going to determine how successful we're going to become in every area of our lives. You don't think about it. Our relationships, our attitude, our leadership, and how well we have equipped ourselves for success or fail to do so are all influenced by the ring that we wear and the power that it wields. When we wear the negative rings, the rings of negative emotions, fear, greed, and rage, what does it do? It literally wreaks havoc in our lives and the lives of those around us. You don't think about it. Fear is debilitating. It robs us of our future. And when you or I place the ring of fear on our finger, that yellow ring of fear, the very thing that we're afraid of continually shows up and manifests in our lives. As Job in the Old Testament aptly put it, what I always feared has happened to me, and what I dreaded has come true. Now, fear not only impedes our decision making, oftentimes fear discourages from even trying. And as a result of that, fear prevents personal growth. Now, when our lives are governed by greed, our focus is only on ourselves. Selfishness and self-centeredness ultimately lead at the end of the day to a breakdown of our relationships. It leads to ethical compromise. It leads to increased stress and anxiety, and it leads to chronic dissatisfaction. Because if we are a gimme pig, gimme, 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 we're never satisfied with what we have, always wanting more. So this orange ring of greed, if we choose to wear it, ultimately leads to our own personal downfall, and we end up living a very shallow, very empty existence. Now, anger is a base emotion. It's part of our fight, flight, or freeze response built deep within the reptilian parts of our brain. But when we take anger to an extreme, what happens? It manifests itself as violence and rage. So the red ring of rage, should we choose to place it on our finger, it leads to a cycle of destruction. And it harms every single person involved, not just us, but the people surrounding us in our lives. It ends up leaving a trail of physical, psychological, and social damage of which you and those around us may never fully recover. This red ring of rage, as it amplifies the anger, the violence, and the rage, it becomes an all-consuming state of anger that literally consumes us. It erodes our relationships, and it can ultimately lead to severe health consequences, legal trouble, and ultimately a sense of hopelessness. Now, interestingly enough, if we go back to the story of the Green Lantern, here's what we find. The lantern rings choose their wearer. Now, I want you to think about that in light of what I just shared with the negative emotions and those negative character traits that we allow to manifest in our lives. What are we doing? We're inviting more of that into our lives if that's what we put out as who we are. Understand this, the ring of power that you wear is going to seek you out as the candidate that best embodies the specific emotions and the specific character traits that it chooses to amplify. Now, let me say that again. The ring of power that you and I choose to wear, that ring is going to seek out the candidate that best embodies the specific emotions and the unique character traits that it chooses to amplify. So it's very, very important that we pay attention to the emotions that we're allowing to experience in our lives and govern our lives and the character traits that we embrace. I mean, think about it. When we choose to don the yellow ring of fear, the orange ring of greed, or the red ring of rage, what are we doing? We're channeling the very worst of us into the world around us and into the very relationships that we should hold most dear. By choosing to focus on the negative, we are allowing those negative rings of power to amplify the very worst within us. Now, that's the bad news. Here's the second part of part one. There's good news here too, because there are other rings of power, not just the negative rings I've focused on, but there are other rings of power that can not only uplift us, but can enrich our lives and uplift and enrich the lives of those around us. But you've got to remember, we have to embody those character traits in order to be chosen. So what are the character traits that we want to make sure that we're living out, the emotions that we want governing our lives to make sure that we're attracting the right ring of power to amplify who we are and what we believe to be true? Well, let's start with hope. Hope leads to a sense of purpose. It leads to greater resilience, and it leads to increased motivation to keep moving forward. Now, that happens when we pair hope with action. Again, action being willpower, to make the conscious decision to move forward. That's why we see hope and willpower, the blue and the green, coming together in the comic book series because they mutually support each other. So understand this, the blue ring of hope, if you want that to be attracted to your life, you've got to live with a sense of purpose, resilience, and motivation, driven by action, but powered by hope. Hope in today, hope in tomorrow, hope in your fellow man. So the blue ring of hope, what does it do? It amplifies a stronger sense of meaning, what's important to us. It amplifies our why. It amplifies a better vision of a better future. And it amplifies a solution-focused attitude that allows us to see the problems and the obstacles of lives as opportunities to overcome. And when we mix hope and action together, the blue ring of hope is going to give us the energy we need to take the next step forward towards a bigger and a better future. Now, let's talk about compassion, because a life that is fueled by empathy and by compassion helps us strengthen the bonds of our relationships, and it creates more meaningful connections in the lives of others. This is amplified when we're living a life of compassion and empathy that invites the indigo ring of compassion to amplify that in our lives. Now, I love this ring of power because it's contagious. When you're a person of compassion, you're an empathetic person that can step into and feel the needs and the wants and the hurts and concerns and help other people work through the challenges of their life. It becomes contagious. And compassion, when demonstrated, modeled, and shared with others, it inspires others to also act with compassion and with kindness. If we act in kindness and we act in compassion, utilizing this indigo ring of compassion, it creates a positive feedback loop as one compassion, one act leads to another act of compassion, leads to an act of kindness, to another act of kindness, and all of a sudden we uplift and we elevate not only our lives, but the lives of our entire community. Now let's talk about love. Now I define love as a commitment to another person's welfare and well-being. Many people define love as an attraction to charm or good looks, but that's not love, that's lust. Love is a commitment to another individual's welfare and well-being, regardless of charm or good looks. And the violet ring of love, when that is attracted to our lives, it amplifies love's unconditional commitment to serve other people, to value other people, to add value to other people. And when we do that, guess what happens? It leads to more meaningful and more impactful relationships. This violet ring of love that amplifies the love that exists in our lives, that unconditional commitment to other people, the benefits of that are incredible. Emotional well-being, a sense of purpose and fulfillment, freedom and peace, and it encourages compassion and empathy. Now, by focusing on the positive and choosing positive character traits that we want to emulate and embrace and live out in our lives, we invite those rings of power that I just spoke about to amplify the very best of who we are and what we do. Now, again, it's important to remember that the lantern rings, according to the DC universe, choose their wearer. Those rings are going to seek out the candidate that best embodies the character traits that it wants to amplify in their life. And that leads me to point number 2 of today's lessons. Now, we may not get to choose the ring of power that we wear, but guess what? You and I get to choose the character traits that we want to embody in the way that we choose to live our lives. So you and I can choose by an intentional act of our will whether we're going to embrace hope, compassion, and love, or whether our lives are going to be defined by fear and greed and anger. So the choices we make in the character traits that you and I choose to embody, to embrace, and to live out are going to dictate and determine which of these powers we get to wield in our interactions with the world around us. And therein lies the choice that you and I get to make every single day of our lives. Now, going back to the comic book series, and even in the movie, if you had an opportunity to watch Ryan Reynolds in the movie Green Lantern, we see that Hal Jordan had to overcome his fear. He had to overcome his lack of belief and confidence in himself to truly be able to wield the power of that green ring of willpower, and to do so in such a way that ultimately made him to become the greatest of all the Green Lantern Corps. Now, think about what would have happened if Hal Jordan had chosen to succumb to his fear, if he had remained in disbelief, and he'd continued to question his value and his worth. His lack of belief would have yielded that green ring of power. His ability to use willpower, the most powerful force in the DC universe, it would have yielded that ring virtually useless. Now, the same truth that Hal Jordan faced is the same truth that holds true for you and for me. Your outlook, my outlook, our outlook, whether positive or negative, and the character traits and values that you and I choose to embrace, to embolden, to emulate in our lives, and to live out as this is an expression of who we are, those things are going to determine the ring of power that we're ultimately going to attract to our lives, and the power that ring is going to amplify, because it only amplifies what resides deep within ourselves. Did you get that? That ring of power that ultimately is attracted to us is going to amplify what resides deep within ourselves. And so that means for you and I, we need to pause and we need to take a reflective look at what really lurks deep inside ourselves. You know, Coach John Wooden, the incredible UCLA basketball coach, said it well. He said this, he said, there's a choice you make in everything you do. So keep in mind that in the end, the choice you make makes you. Now, it's important to remember in the DC universe, the green ring of willpower that's powered by an unwavering belief in ourselves and in our ability is the most powerful force in the universe. That green ring of power is the most powerful of all the rings of power. But we've got to remember that that ring of power is only going to be attracted to those who embody the character traits that that ring seeks to amplify. So that means we've got to pay attention to a very important foundational truth. And that truth is this: our thoughts shape our beliefs. Our beliefs shape our actions. And our actions over time are going to become the very habits that ultimately govern our lives. So as we think, we say, we do, and we become. So that means we've got to look deep within and discover what's there, because it's our outlook, whether positive or negative. It's the character traits and values that we choose to embrace, that we choose to live out, that we choose to believe represent the very best of us, are going to determine the ring of power that you and I are going to attract to our lives, and the powers that ring is going to amplify. Because remember, that ring is going to only amplify what resides deep within ourselves. So, to borrow a phrase from an ancient knight from an old movie starring Indiana Jones, you must choose, but you must choose wisely. You can't forget this fact. The lantern rings are going to choose their wearer. Your ring of power is going to choose you based upon the character traits that you live out, the emotions that you allow to govern your lives, because the rings of power, they seek out the candidate that best embodies the character traits that it desires to amplify in the world around it. So by choosing to focus on the negative, you were allowing the ring of power to amplify the very worst of what's inside of us. But by choosing to focus on the positive, by choosing to believe in ourselves, our talents, our gift, and our abilities, and by continually focus on personally growing ourselves to become a better version of who we are and what we do every single day, we're going to allow that ring of power to amplify the very best within us. And every day, as we continue to get a little bit better and a little bit better, that ring is going to amplify a little bit more of the best of us every single day. Now, again, positive or negative, we get to choose. The character traits that really represent who we are, we get to choose those. As we think, we say, we do, we become. Thoughts become belief. Belief becomes the actions that we take. The actions that we take ultimately become the habits that govern our lives. And the ring of power only amplifies what we think, what we believe, and what we ultimately allow to be expressed through our lives. Those rings of power only amplify what's inside of us. And therein lies the choice. It's a choice that you get to make, that I get to make, that we get to choose every single day. And so that leaves only two questions yet unanswered. And it's up to you and it's up to me, because only you and I can answer these questions for ourselves. The first question is this: what color is your ring of power? And the second question is this: what does that ring and what does that color say about you? I'm Dr. John Terry, the Black Belt Leader. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.